Hey guys, so this is something I've wanted to do for a while, and it's the characters I've created, and hopefully might inspire some other people. These characters are inspired from vast things, armors, friggin' different sorts of media, all sorts of different crazy crap, and I will talk about those characters, and who they are, what they do, and where they come from, and that sort of stuff. And I think it might be appropriate to start to the left here. So, the first person I'm going to meet is one of my newest characters. She's quite a fun one. She was quite a fun one to make, and very, different to the sort of characters that I normally make. She's a trader. She's an Imperial trader. So her name is Vitelia Autumncloak. Now, as you can see, she's got a mix between... Now, I make all these armors, not all the armors, of course, not this one right here. A lot of the mashups I put together. I don't make the physical armors, I'm not a 3D artist, but I mash a lot of the gear together, or it's a character inspired by armor, just like Viridian here. So, Vitelia sounds a lot better. I kind of wanted to make a character that was once an Imperial soldier, that was an actual trader. Now, I did make a trader a long time ago, but it wasn't really a trader, it was a trader lookalike, and we'll get to him later. Now, her backstory was that she was a young Imperial soldier during the Great War, during the attack of the Imperial City, to take it back, and her entire unit was wiped out. And she had her back against the wall. She had, a squad of Old Mary soldiers about to end her when Ulfric and his troops came through and obliterated the soldiers that were about to kill her. And she joined on to the Northern Legions, and she fought alongside them until eventually the Empire called a truce. Now, just like the Northern Legions, in that time that she spent, maybe a week with them, she fell in love with a young Nord. Her and a young Nord connected, and just like that young Nord, she was very angered by the Empire's surrender in her eyes, and she left with Ulfric to go north to Skyrim with this new lover of hers, and she participated in the Markarth incident, and eventually she married him, and Ulfric was imprisoned, and blah blah. His men scattered back to where they came from, and she went to Riften where he came from, where he was a guard, and he was killed. So eventually she had a child. She's actually a follower in the Stormcloak League brigades, and she had a child, and that child was only like a couple months old. Her husband was killed, and he was a Riften guard. He was killed in the riots, and he joined the riots, the Riften citizens, against the Empire's weakness and corruption and this and that, and he was unfortunately killed by Imperial soldiers, killed with the very people that she once served with. And she vowed one day to get revenge for her husband and to teach her daughter the true Northern way. And her daughter's actually an Imperial, but she's got the height of a Nord and pale skin, red hair. So she's a half-breed. And this is Vitelia. She was... Vitelia? Whatever the fuck her name is. She was once an Imperial soldier, and she's taken the armour of dead Imperial soldiers to kind of make her own, to sort of blend in with how she would wear armour. Because again, she was trained from, maybe the age of 15 to fighting age to wear Imperial armour, and why not mould a lot of it to your body? It does have a lot of benefits. Now, Viridian right here, she was a character obviously inspired by the armour she's wearing, called Viridian. When the armour first came out, it was green, it looked like it was made of obsidian, orcite, or whatever it's called, the orc metal. And it looked so fancy, like high elven-like, it was like a mix between all different cultures. An orc metal, made for an elven knight, made out of the sort of style of a high elf, or an elven style. I've got to turn her around real quick. So yeah, and so she's actually a half-breed, just like Vitilia's daughter. Her mother was a wood elf. Her father was a blacksmith guard in, I forgot the city's name, but it's a city in Valenwood that is very highly, high elven styled. It's got a lot of high elves in it. And again, her parents met, and she was eventually born. She's very tall, like a high elf, or in between a Nord and a high elf. She's not short for a wood elf. And of course, she took up the blade and the shield. She didn't follow the typical elven route, and so she pretty much wanted to explore Tamriel. And before she left home, her father made sure that he'd make his best armour yet, and he was quite talented with the orc metal. And so he made an armour for her that represented his sort of style of armour of ancient elves, and her style being a wood elf, and of course out of a very strong and flexible metal for the orcs, because he was taught by an orc blacksmith in his trade. So eventually he made his best work and gave it to his daughter, and she travelled to Skyrim, probably a few months before the call of the Dragonborn. And when the Dragonborn needed followers, that was the best time for adventure, to explore the world, become a hero, to fulfill something, to aid the mighty Dragonborn. She's still alive, which is pretty good. And of course, we've got Marulia right here. We're going to turn her around real quick. Now, Marulia is, as you can see by her last name, the niece of General Tullius. I think I've read some lore somewhere where the elves, they took the Imperial City for the first time, they killed a lot of the Imperial families, like the high nobilities families, or military political families. They butchered them, they slaughtered them. We'll have a character we kind of meet there halfway in this line we'll come across. And a lot of General Tullius's kids either died fighting, or were executed by the Dominion. And Marulia right here is one of his last surviving members of his family, a niece, and his brother. And he trained her from the time she was a child all the way to an adult, and she's an Imperial Vanguard. But she's a very elite Imperial Vanguard, as you can see by her gear, which is the Creation Club content for... I don't bother doing that quest. And if I'm going to do that quest, I'm going to do it not as this champion. This is Marulia's gear. She is, she's a niece of the General of the 5th Legion. So she's got a lot of money backing her. And she was one of the first characters I ever played. She was the first Imperial character I played as, when I had Centaurus in the background as just a common soldier. When she went to go attack Fort Aragstag to kind of start the Civil War campaign. Cecilia, now as you can see by the end of her name, she also shares the name of an Imperial General. But her father, who was that general, died a long time ago. And you get to meet him in Morrowind, and you get to meet him in Skyrim in the Dragonborn DLC, General Cassius. Now, Cecilia, right, she's a vampire. As you can see by her face, she looks rather like a vampire. She's 227 or 8 years old now, right? She's a very old individual. Now, what happened to her before she became a vampire, she was basically stationed at a Imperial fort during the Oblivion Crisis. And there was some young upstart captain there that had a wealthy family, and he was given the position because of his family's wealth and power. She was under him, right? And then one night an Oblivion Gate opens up just outside, within 15 metres of their gate. Now, her idea was to go out there and charge it and break it down real quick before it could really formulate into the ground, before it could really soil, and destroy it before it really stood a chance of making a foundation. But this young upstart bitch, pretty much, he cancelled that and he locked the fort down, which was the worst thing he could have done. Now, after a few days of this gate fully becoming functional and Daedra coming out, she took charge by locking him inside of his barracks. She she rebelled, and she locked him aside and took over control of the fort. And she took in, there was like maybe 150 something there. She took around 57 with her into the gate, and she came back with only like 7 to 8 men, and pretty badly wounded herself. Cuts, bruises, puncture wounds, all sorts of things. Not just from Daedric steel, Daedric weapons, but from the plants. I mean, they've got vines there that can penetrate your arm with spikes. You've got poisonous flowers. You've got grass that can cut your leg up. She was very badly wounded, and she was dragged back inside the gate by surviving men. And then they had to force to lock the gate down and continuously be harassed for days on end of constant Daedric attacks. And she pretty much wasted away inside the medbay, dying with the rest of the other injured men. Unfortunately, well, I guess fortunately for her, one of the cooks was actually a vampire. And of course he couldn't get out to feed. He couldn't feed on any prisoners, and he couldn't really get out to feed secretly. But fortunately for him, there was wounded inside the med bays or inside the barracks. Now he took the opportunity to find one, and unfortunately Cecilia, unfortunately, either sort of the circumstance, she wasn't infected. She wasn't dying of disease, so he could drink her, and that's exactly what he did. And over the course of 5 days, I think it's 3 days, 3 days, she gained a fever, and she died. Everyone thought, she just died due to blood loss or because an infection took place due to her wounds in Oblivion. But she died, and this young Imperial soldier was carrying her away. This is 3 days. This fort's been, it's been under siege for an entire week, and men haven't gotten many sleep. The quietest it's ever been was when Cecilia and her men went inside the gate. It was probably the quietest 15 minutes of their entire lives. And she had died, so they wanted to drag her away so this infection didn't take place and kill everybody else. And a young So imagine this fort. It's got a big corridor. Um, corridor looks inside the fort, and also looks inside at the exterior. But it's a long drop. It's like a 15-meter drop, which would break your legs if you jumped outside of it. Now, she's getting dragged in this corridor to be put to the flames. When she opens her eyes and comes back to life, and she jumps straight up and latches onto that poor young Imperial's neck, and she drains him dry. But when she comes to and realises what she's done, she's horrified. She looks out the window and she sees the gate falling to the ground. Daedra had busted through the fort and was slaughtering and killing anything with a heartbeat. She looked outside the other window leading to the exterior of the fort, and she jumped outside of it, and she landed on the floor without a broken limb, because she had become a vampire, a supernatural being with increased strength, major resistances against damage or fatality, and just supernatural. She fled, and for over 200 and something years, she never drank from an innocent ever again. She drank from bandits. She became a bounty hunter. She would go to inns at night time and drink there. And over the course of, say, 100 years after she'd fed on enough people, she learned how to disguise herself. Let me show you real quick. And she eventually learnt Mortal Mask, which she was able to hide her appearance, but her sunken cheeks and her cold touch would give away what she was to a proper hunter. And of course the fangs under her, behind her lips. She was able to do this, and eventually she moved to Skyrim, about 60 or 70 years prior to the events of the Dragonborn, because it was colder, the sun wasn't as bad, and of course there wasn't that many vampire hunting groups, because they hunted her for what she was. The villagers came after her many times. And eventually the Vigilants did find their way to Skyrim, but nowhere near as big as they are in Cyrodiil. And eventually she rescued a young child, a young werewolf, on the side of the road during a very cold winter's night. And this is going to be the next character we come across. Now, Cecilia right here, everyone in this crew knows that she's a vampire, because again, the Dragonborn has accepted what she is, and so she doesn't need to hide who she is anymore amongst the people she fights with. But again, she's always done the right thing. She's always been a knight at heart, a good person. She fed on the first person out of pure instinct, out of just muscle memory as a vampire. Just boom, hungry, fangs, in skin. He was dead anyway, pretty much. But yes, she was the first and only person who's ever killed that was innocent. She has fed on dead bodies of the innocents that already died, that were already dead within an hour or so. But she's never taken the life of an innocent by drinking their blood, or killing them, because again, innocence. Now, she rescued a young Nord on the side of the road during a cold winter's night, and that young Nord is our next character. Freya. Freya's a pure-born werewolf. Now what are they in my game? Pure-born werewolves are those born with the parents that are influenced by her scene. And they're born as a werewolf. They've got bonuses, as in they don't have to worry about turning in the middle of the night and becoming a savage beast. They're in full control. From the time they're like 15, and they can turn whenever they want, but they are in full control of what they are. But they can never be cured, and not always for the weaknesses of the werewolf, like poison or silver. So she's always going to have those weaknesses. She can never cure them. But again, she's stronger, she's faster, and of course she can command. She can command her wolf, because again, her soul is the wolf. A human and wolf soul were mixed and matched. With a werewolf that was bitten, they've got two souls, a Daedric mutt and their own. And the Daedric mutt's always eager to get out, always angry to get out. She doesn't have to worry about losing herself to a full moon or losing herself to anger. She can control what she is. Now, her backstory is, when she was around 10 years old, she was, her and her family and a pack to live outside Whiterun. Now it's a very famous, it's kind of like Moonlight Tower, no, it's a Nordic ruin, but it's like Moonlight something. And her pack lived there in peace. They were good people, they were werewolves, everyone knew they were werewolves in Skyrim, but they weren't the sort of werewolves that hunted people. They hunted animals, they hunted other bad vampires. They were a service to Whiterun. They would hunt feral werewolves, they would hunt bad ones, and they would hunt vampires. They were pretty much supernatural protection towards Whiterun. Now, people would trade with them furs and skins and all that sort of stuff and respect what they were. A lot of them were pureborn, and a lot of them were those that were, bitten and trained and looked after by these other werewolves, this pact. And eventually this, knight from Cyrodiil, this hunter from Cyrodiil that had a very powerful axe that could cut werewolves up like butter, he'd heard about these people and he wanted to hunt them because, again, that was his job. That was how he got fame and glory, and he'd take their pelts and sell them across Cyrodiil. They have a character very similar to that, but he's not exactly like that because, this guy is actually dead. Both of them are actually dead in a certain manner of speaking. Now, this knight, this warrior, he was a Nord. He was in Cyrodiil, and he came to Skyrim, and he turned up at night time, and he threatened to kill him. Now, of course, they defend themselves by getting into stance. But he revealed an axe, and that very axe is on her back, the Woofle axe. Now, the Woofle axe was created to cure, lycanthropy in the rather physical form of it. He revealed his axe, and they didn't think anything of it, and they all turned to werewolves to defend themselves, because they didn't need blades, they didn't need bows, they had claws and teeth. And he cut them up like butter. He slaughtered them. Each werewolf that come at him, he just cut them up, and they dropped like friggin' rocks into the water. Her parents, Freya's parents, told her to run and not look back, and so she did as a scared young girl. She took off and she ran for it. But it was a very cold winter's night, and werewolves, they're like dogs. They have a high body temperature, and it's a bit of the stuff I've taken there from Twilight, where they're a bit over. Yeah, I know Twilight, but whatever. It seems they've got high endurance. They've got better hearing, better senses, better agility. Their senses are super saiyan pretty much, along with their body temperature. And even though they can keep themselves pretty well warm, a cold winter's night in Skyrim is it's freezing. It's enough to make a vampire a bit uneasy. And she ran out and she never looked back, but she ended up collapsing on the road and being unconscious because, she'd gotten way too cold. But a knight had picked her up. A knight that travelled the night and hunted vampires, hunted bandits, hunted scum, picked her up and took her back. Took her back to where she was living and, warmed her up. When she woke up, she smelt a vampire, which her pack had hunted a lot. And she growled at her and, that woman, Cecilia right here, threw the blade to the ground and told the girl to calm herself down. Eventually the girl, realising where she was and that she was alone, she did calm herself down. She knew exactly what she was in front of, a vampire. She'd seen vampires kill members of her pack before. They'd seen the ferociousness of them, and eventually, they got along over time, having to deal with each other's smell, and Freya being a little bitch, being a little dog, pretty much feisty and talkative and just a pain in the ass to deal with. Now, Cecilia, she heard the story that Freya had told her, and so she decided to train her a bit differently. She was trained by Blade. Freya only goes into a werewolf form when she desperately needs to. When she's on a bounty hunt, versing multiple opponents on her own, she relies on her blades. She was trained by Cecilia not to turn to a werewolf because her strength can become a weakness to the right people. So Cecilia taught her how to use blades, and eventually, she did that. Like I said, she followed in Cecilia's footsteps. She's a bounty hunter. She's a supernatural hunter. She'll hunt feral werewolves and vampires and go out bounty hunting, killing the scum of Skyrim. Now, when she was 17, she left Cecilia and went out on her own. She found herself in Cyrodiil, and she heard rumours of a famous werewolf hunter, the famous Axe, and she wanted revenge. Now, she actually joined the Women of the North, which were barbaric sort of characters. Probably seen them in many of my different videos. They wear black sort of revealing armour. She joined them, but it wasn't really for her. She's more of a lone. She's more of a beta. She's an alpha, but she's more of a lone wolf. And she found this man, and he knew exactly what she was because he looked into her eyes, the eyes of a pure-born werewolf, and knew exactly what she was. And he smiled and grabbed the hilt of his blade of the axe, and then she smiled back and pulled out her blade. And he was shocked because this axe is heavy. It takes a lot to swing. By the time he could even get it over his head to drop her down on her, she had already stuck a blade into his chest. She was quick, she was fast. He had no idea, he thought that she would completely rely on her pure-born wolf abilities. But no, she stuck a blade right into his guts and killed him. She took the axe to make sure that axe wouldn't be used to kill other werewolves, unless of course they were feral, which she's done beforehand. And she trained herself to get strong. As you can see, she is quite strong. So she could use that axe without having to worry about its pushback, it's how slow it is. And she can use it like it's an extension of her own arm. Now we're going to go to another character. He's also a pure-born werewolf, but to a different sort of way. And of course I only picked her because I wanted to create a unique sort of armor mashup here, just like Freya's armor. Most of them are mashups. And this is another mashup. And her father was a werewolf, was someone that was infected and bitten. He'd travel from place to place to place to place. Eventually, before he met a woman and fell in love, and he told her exactly what he was. Now, during certain nights, he would disappear from the farm and take off and go out hunting. He'd let the beast out, and the beast would go nuts. And he'd come back home, and eventually she fell pregnant, and Renika was born. She wasn't born like Freya inside of a werewolf pack and raised by a vampire. She was raised by two loving parents, which one was a werewolf, which gave her the gift of lycanthropy, being pure born. She's got the Super Saiyan senses and agility, but she's also got the weaknesses of silver. So she was raised like an ordinary child, but out in the woods, because it wouldn't be very sensible having a child running around a town with very moon-like yellow eyes. Someone would definitely take notice of what she is. And I really liked the mashup for her. I really liked it. I thought it was really cool. But I wanted a pure-born werewolf that wasn't sort of pack-related, born and raised in a pack. She's a worshipper of her scene. She's just an ordinary Nord with, not so ordinary abilities. Rosella was actually an armor a character I was gonna make for a certain armor that came out called like the Coco Rose armor, but it never fit for the body, so I went completely made an entirely new character. She's a half-breed of an Imperial and a Dark Elf. As you can very well see, she's an Imperial. Her mother was an Imperial. Her father was a Dark Elf. Her mother was a noblewoman in Cyrodiil, in the Imperial City, and she was married to an older man, and she had a Dunmer bodyguard. Now you can see where this is going, the bodyguard situation. This older man tried to, would lay with her, force himself upon her every night to try and, get a son out of her. And it grew quite tiresome, and she didn't like that. She was thrown into this life, forced to marry someone she never loved, and someone just jumped on her at night and tried to breed her. Now, eventually, this bodyguard was hired to protect her and keep her safe, and that's exactly what he did. But they became friends, and eventually down the path became more than friends. Within 4 to 5 months, they'd become lovers, and when they were out shopping and doing his duties, they'd go somewhere quiet and share some personal time with each other. Eventually, before she fell pregnant, and of course, her husband was excited, hoping for a son, but not really. If he had a daughter, he had a daughter. But unfortunately, he had heard the conversation between her and a bodyguard about this, being scared that it could be his, that it could be a bastard child, not his child, and he found out. But he couldn't act because this bodyguard was, if they were really in love and he tried to attack her, this bodyguard would have killed him. He was no match for a trained Dunmer. So he hired assassins. Now, what had happened was when they were out on their, she was out in the city doing shopping, they were attacked by these assassins, the mother and the bodyguard. Now, he gave his life in service so she could get away. He held him back so she could run away, and she ran right back to her father, told him everything. And, they kind of knew that this was the husband that had ordered the hit. She was, the husband was dealt with secretly and quietly. Of course, her lover was killed, and she was now pregnant with, no known family, and of course, the husband was dead. There wasn't anything to gain from him, and especially, the child. Especially the child came out with dark elf skin. It was to be known that she was unfaithful. So the father exiled her and sent her to Skyrim to live out the rest of her days, and eventually Rosella was born. She joined under Freya's pack by being a mercenary, following her bounty hunters, and eventually became a werewolf. Now, she can transform into a werewolf. She's got sort of like grey fur and red eyes. All these three characters here are werewolves, and they all have their own transformation. And she became one of Freya's lovers. She was a Imperial half-breed Dunmer, raised in Skyrim. She's got the Skyrim Nordic accent. A Sami. Now, a Sami, inspired from Legends of Korra, was a character born to a Nord beggar who was taken in by a Khajiit wealthy merchant. And they went back to elsewhere where Asami was born, and she was raised very similar to Asami's story in Legends of Korra. Her mother was, the mansion that she lived in with her stepfather and her mother was raided by destruction mages, and her mother was killed by fire. And she was trained to kill mages or defend herself against mages by being trained by a mage, a very like a very powerful mage, and also trained with archery. So she's like a Forsworn. She uses magic and she uses archery. But of course, her father was secretly killing mages that weren't, parts of authority or those that were bloating. He hated destruction mages that were arrogant, and he killed them. And she found out, and he got a bit angry that she wasn't supportive of it, and he somewhat like shot an arrow at her, and she completely dodged it. And out of muscle memory, she just grabbed her on her own, stuck it, and killed him, and she fled. It's a little bit different to the Legends of Korra story, but that's kind of how I want this character to go. She's got a very cool, unique outfit. Clothed leather armor, and look, she hasn't got the hairstyle of Asami, but I've given like the neck bands, like as the wedding things, like they do with the War Tribe in Avatar Universe. So this is kind of her. She looks very Asian, so I was like, man, that works. Now, of course, beside her, we've got Korra. But how she met Korra? Well, she actually met Korra in Dawnstar, because we'll kind of get to that. We'll get to how they met and how they became wives when I get to Korra. Korra, oh my god, this thing's going to go for an entire hour. Holy crap, I didn't really think about this, so I might have to oh my god, I hope someone actually enjoys this shit. So Korra, she's also a half-breed. Her mother was a Nord, her father was a Redguard. Her father was a shipmate that crashed on the northern shores of Skyrim, and a bunch of fishermen that fished the area found the ship and found a lone survivor, and took that lone survivor to a witch that lived out in the woods. That witch was a very talented mage. She knew everything. She was just blessed, but she was outcasted by her own people because she knew necromancy and conjuration. She was very talented at it, but she was outcast. Now, of course, when she raised this Nord back to this Redguard, she and him had fallen in love during their time together, and they eventually stayed with each other. He didn't go try to find another ship to jump on, and he fell in love, and eventually Korra was born. Korra was also gifted in the magical arts, just like her mother. But when Korra was around around 10, her mother died of sickness. She was pretty young, so she would have been under 10. Her mother died of a sickness, and her father couldn't stand being around the place anymore, so he returned back to the ships and took his daughter with him. Korra grew up on the seas. She was lifting crates and cargo around. She became very strong, but she was very talented like her mother, and in her fits of anger when she'd fight other people that looked down and that called her a girl that didn't belong on the ship, or too young or too stupid to belong on the ship, she'd punch them, she'd fight with them. But sometimes when she punched them, fire magic would come out of her hands, or ice magic would come out of her hands. She was using the elements of magic. Eventually, when she was 19, her father died, and she docked on the shores of Dawnstar, and she wanted to learn how to further train her magical ability, because she could only ever use it when she was angry or when she was in a fight. And she went to the college, but she didn't last that long. She was like, nah, man, this isn't for me. It's too uniform, it's too proper. She was a very rebellious person, very hard to teach. And she left within like 3 weeks of being there. And she went down to the inn, and she met a mercenary that was there traveling around, earning gold for killing animals, undead, all sorts of different things. That mercenary was Asami. And Asami thought she was a very beautiful person, because Asami is on the, she likes the girls and the boys. And she thought she was very beautiful, gave her a look and offered to buy her a drink, and they had drinks. And eventually they had a fun night, like not a sexual night. And Asami offered her to join a crew, because Korra was like she could fight. And Korra needed money, she needed something to do. So she joined Asami. Months down the track, they'd become best friends, and Korra had taken a bear attack and almost died. And Asami was heartbroken. She saw a life without Korra. This is very similar to what I did the whole season 3. She saw a life without Korra, and it devastated her. And so she took her back to the Temple of Kinnereth, and she stayed with her for like 5 to 6 months, not 3 years, not this time. And she made sure, she stopped working to make sure she could look after Korra. Once she got out of the temple, that was her number one goal, and she fell in love. And eventually, once Korra was better and feeling better, Cora had also fallen in love with a woman that looked after her, someone that was there guarding her back, and they went to Riften while it was under Imperial control so they could be married, because the Stormcloaks in my game would not allow two women to marry each other. Because the Stormcloaks are a bit, they're homophobic. They could be homophobic, and they're certainly racist. So if you're racist, you're going to be homophobic. I've never seen a racist person not be a homophobe. So yeah, they got married, and eventually, the Dragonborn was actually there when she'd recently just left home herself, and she found herself in Riften, and she went to the temple, and she saw Cora and Asami get married. And eventually, when the call was needed, they were still in Riften, and at that time, and they joined up with her. This one's Minerva. Now, she's also a follower. I changed the way she looks for my own personal taste, so I can actually play as her. She's my college character. She's a playable college character. She's the guild character for the mages. Now, I had her beforehand, was like an adventurer, right? She was an adventurer. She would travel Dwemer ruins across Tamriel. She spent 50 years out on her own. Now, she looks quite young for 50, because that's the way elves are. They live to like 400 to 500 years old. I think it's like 400. And she left home because she was this rebellious sort of elf. She's not your typical elven mage. She's really not. She's quite adventurous, quite quirky. And, she went across Tamriel, the ancient ruins of people's, all sorts of different things, just ancient ruins, and she would explore and travel and take artifacts and these sort of things. Eventually, in Skyrim, she did exactly that with the Ethereal quest, and then she joined on to the Mages Guild, the College of Winterhold, and over a space of maybe 2 years, I played her quest, in my books, like a year or two before the events of the High King's death. So she's a pre-existing character that I played as in the game. And eventually she became the Mages Guild, the college thingy-bob. She was very talented in destruction magic, but she's also bisexual, because she's a very quirky, the High Elves, I imagine they'd be very uptight, very strict, very fancy, and I'm not too sure they'd be very accepting of same-sex couples either. And she would mess around with the female servants that weren't either High Elves or whatever, and she didn't like the whole rules that she had to go to this college to become an old merry mage. She wanted to do her own thing. She wanted to live her own life. She's kind of half inspired from the Queen of ESO, where she left, that she didn't want the responsibility, or she just wanted to do her own thing, and that's exactly what she did, before eventually she found the College of Winterhold to study and improve her magic, because she was very talented at destruction. She was a master of it, but she wanted to learn the other spells, conjuration, necromancy, all sorts of different things. And eventually she studied there, and she found it to be a new home, and she became the Archmage eventually. Ansgar, well, Minerva found Ansgar. She was just doing the Ancient Nord Amulet quest. This is the kind of way she looked. The reason I showed her is because she's a character that I use as a follower. She's not just some boring Nord mage that wears mage clothing. She looks like a travelling Nord adventurer. Minerva helped her find the scroll that proved that her ancestry leads all the way back to Ysgramor, and eventually Ansgar followed her out and didn't stay inside of a tomb for the rest of her existence. Tonarok also shares a similar name with a Legends of Korra character, which is Legends of Korra's character's father. Korra's father. He's my companion's character. Born and raised in Skyrim, went to Hammerfell for a few years, came back to Skyrim, joined on to the companions, and just like Minerva, he's a pre-existing character, to where he became a harbinger over the space of a year, because he was just a master with blades. He was so talented, and eventually he earned the right to become harbinger. He was more than a match for any of the members that were there, and again, over the space of a year of doing mercenary contracts and aiding the companions, he became a werewolf, but he cured himself. He wanted the companions to go back clean. He didn't like going to sleep and having visions or nightmares, and he cured himself, and only at the moment one of the twins, and of course Ayla, is a werewolf, because Ayla wants to be a werewolf. Haven't got her here at the moment though, but this is my playable companion's guild character. Alora. Now, going all the way back to the Talia saying there about the Thalmor, the old Mary that killed imperial families, Alora was one of those soldiers that was ordered to kill or sweep homes of noble or political imperial families and kill their loved ones. And that's exactly what she did. But she suffered nightmares, and she was super guilty about it. And over the years to come, she left the Dominion, completely just dropped her armor and took off. And she travelled as a mercenary, trying to, escape what she had done, redeem herself somehow. And she was, and I've actually played as her. She's got the player's inventory. And she, she hated what she was, what she had become, what she had done, and, she was aiding, just trying to find a reason to redeem herself before she heard the call of the Dragonborn. People that needed to help the Dragonborn succeed. And, of course, she took that opportunity, that would be the best way to redeem herself by fighting and dying beside the Dragonborn's cause to save Tamriel. Exactly what she did. Zarita, I had her as a playable character, actually. She started off as a Redguard before she became a vampire. So she's actually a Redguard. I know her skin is a very different colour, but in my game vampires kind of go pale dead. I started playing as her as a young, adventuring Redguard, did a couple of quests where I had to go into Dwemer Ruins, like for the Markarth when you had to go kill a spider or retrieve some dead squads or whatever. I kind of wanted a character for Cecilia to teach and train as a vampire. And eventually she was ambushed by vampires with one of her squad mates, which she was a mercenary team with, and her squad mate was killed and she was infected and she was turned. And eventually Cecilia found her while hunting vampires in the region, took her in, and trained her. And here she is. And I'm thinking, I'm actually thinking about her character once I do the Dawnguard quest. I'm thinking that she'll find out how to return herself back to mortal, and I'll turn her back to mortal, giving her back her old look. But she'll no longer be a vampire. She'll be a Redguard again. I can't really change her back to a Nordic, her Redguard look, because she's tagged as undead, and in some mod in my game, if I turn her back to a mortal, she'll turn to a skeleton. Octavia. Now this is a character I created a long time ago. Oh man, it's a really horrible sort of pose. That doesn't help. That's much better. So, Octavia, I wanted to start a character that was a nobody. I was just a farmer, right? And that's exactly what I played her as. I had her as a farmer, where she would live on a farm, and her mother was there too, and her younger adopted sister. Her father was an Imperial soldier who got killed pretty early on. And, they'd moved to Skyrim to find a job as a farmer, to be with their father, but eventually he was killed. Before the Civil War really kicked off. He was killed on a patrol by Stormcloak raiders, rebels, before the war kicked off. And that's where they lived, before eventually, they were sent by the farm's owner to retrieve some supplies from Whiterun, and on their journey they were attacked by bandits. The younger adopted sister, who was 10 years old, got killed by an arrow, and her mother basically held back a few of them as long as she could, so they could run for it. And of course a rogue arrow caught her little sister, her mother was slaughtered by bandits, and she was clipped by an arrow and left bleeding on the side of the road before she could get close to the farm again, which is a walled farm. It's called Frostfall Farm. It's a mod made by the guy that made... Oh, damn, I've got the name of it, but he made like a Kingdom mod. It's called Frost... I don't remember the name. I'll show you the map. There it is, Frostfalls. It's a mod. And, well, luckily for her, that Freya, this is a character for Freya, was in the area, and she saw what happened. And just before the bandits were getting close enough to kill her, Freya comes out of nowhere and butchers them, just slaughters them with her giant axe. And Freya picked her up and, well, took her up to the watchtower where the guards, had been killed, where the bandits took over. And, well, she had taken her back to the temple in Kinnereth and left her there to hit, because she got her back alive. She had a big graze on her belly, a few arrow wounds, and so she left her there. And over the space of, say, 6 months, Octavia got come back to full health. She was only a skinny farm girl, like really skinny. And I'm actually going to show you a few pictures, so give me 1 second. So this is what Octavia looked like when she was a farmer. Very skinny, petite, frail, scared girl. And now, well, she's been trained by Freya, who, and she's grown quite strong. As you can see from the physical appearance, she's now got abs and she's now a lot wider. She went from being this frail farm girl to an absolute weapon. And I really wanted a transformation sort of character, because I used Proteus to change the way they look and physical appearance and all that sort of stuff, so I can change her body weight, I can change the way her hairstyle is. And, well, this is Octavia. She is a weapon. She went from being a scared girl that run away from a fight if it got near, to someone that would charge it in a heartbeat. Now, she eventually found Freya. She actually camped outside looking for her and was camped out just outside of a cave. But Freya took her in. Now, Freya is a strict, full-on lesbian because she was raised by a very attractive vampire that she had no... that's just the way she was. She was raised by Cecilia. And she joined the Women of the North who worship women. And, well, Octavia was very beautiful, and Freya didn't waste any chances that she could to bed such a beautiful woman. Exactly what she did. They also became lovers like Rosella. Sort of like a lesbian pact. No, there's some kinky stuff in there. So, Octavia's also a werewolf. When she turns into a werewolf, her fur goes brown, and her eyes go, well, blue. The next character, man, to my right, is a very expensive character, man. This is a character that I created because I thought one character was a virgin. Where to go from here, mate? This is some crazy shit. Sigurd Bearclaw. Now, Sigurd Bearclaw is one of my most expensive backstory characters ever. So, well, I'm gonna spoil it pretty much straight up so I can actually explain it properly without trying to sound mysterious. She is the secret daughter of Ulfric Stormcloak. Now, when Ulfric Stormcloak went into Cyrodiil, he had an older brother that died, and I've discussed the possible backstories for this entire Skyrim saga many times beforehand. Ulfric's older brother, heir to the throne of Windhelm, had died in the Great War. Ulfric had found out and left the monks, and he had returned to Windhelm to avenge his brother but take his place as heir to Windhelm. And for a Nord to become a leader of a city, he first must command soldiers in battle before he can lead civilians in peace. And he went to Cyrodiil, the last push, the push to kick the elves out of the Imperial City. But he was issued a housecarl from a very, dangerous woman's daughter. This mercenary, one of the most known mercenaries in East March, one of the greatest warriors of her time. She was a mercenary called Tova. And her daughter, she had trained her daughter just like her, but her daughter didn't have that adventurous, go out and earn gold sort of behaviour. She wanted to serve. And she became a guard. It was overkill, because she had the skill of 7 guards in total. She could dance around with thugs and just slaughter them. There was no chance. And, the Bear of the North, Ulfric's father, knew this and assigned her to be Ulfric's, housecarl. And she went to war with him. She went from, her name was Morana, Doomson. But eventually she earned her own name and was renamed Morana Bearclaw. She was the right hand of Ulfric Stormcloak, the shield that protected fatal hits, and the blade that struck down his enemies. Now, when the war ended, the Empire's peace treaty or surrender, Ulfric was quite mad, and he went back to Skyrim to eventually find out that the Forsworn had taken over Markarth. And he was angry, he wanted an outlet for that, and so he took that outlet by slaughtering the Reachmen and any of those that served him. And of course, Morana was with him. And they'd grown quite close over the time, and they'd shared a few sheets from here to there, at the end of the war, and a celebration night of Ulfric freeing the city from the Reach. They had shared sheets yet again. But unfortunately, or unknown to, I wouldn't say unfortunately, that he had ceded, Sigurd and her sister. Ulfric was soon arrested by the Empire and the Thalmor and sent to prison somewhere in the Somerset Isles. Morana had no idea, but she had become pregnant with twins. 9 months down the track, she had given birth to twins, but she had died. Her own mother had to cut Brianna out of her to keep her alive, because she couldn't get the last child out, and her own mother had to kill her to save her children. Now, of course, her grandmother raised them both, just like their mother, and they took their mother's name, Bearclaw. They have no idea who their father is, just some Nordic soldier that died during the Great War, or died a while ago. So, again, they are, I've just thought about that, their age would be a little bit different, wouldn't it? Either way, they're going to be the children. We're going to leave it like that. So, the war says it could have started 31 years ago and finished 26 years ago, so I don't know how long the war actually went for. And so, her and her sister were trained by their grandmother, just like, their mother was. and they didn't really want to serve as a guard, but they wanted to serve to kick out the rot of the Empire. They were raised to hate the Empire. Exactly what they did. Now, this is a character I played as when I wanted to fight the Imperials. This is my Stormcloak character, Sigund. And, of course, my other character, the one that I base myself off, is my Imperial character, because I choose Empire. And I'm always thinking about what if. What if the roles were changed and I played Sigund as the main Civil War character and not Centaurus? So eventually, the call of the Dragonborns come, and both sides have realised the Dragonborn has returned. Like, holy shit, like the Dragonborn is a deity. It is someone that conquered all of Tamriel and made an empire without even needing dragon shouts or dragons to absorb their power or whatever. This is an individual that could change the tide of Tamriel on their own. So both Ulfric and Tullius have sent their best soldiers to gain this person as an ally. Not knowing at the time she wasn't worthy of anything. She could have been killed by 7 or 8 bandits. And of course they understood that, so they trained her and they protected her to try and get them, or the Dragonborn, to like them so they could join their side. Over that time, Sigund and Centaurus realised that their war was insignificant to the war that was coming. Dragons were back, and they were worse than any sort of Stormcloak or Imperial army that was waging war upon them. And, Sigund and Centaurus had to put up with each other, because they were both sent to the Dragonborn, and the Dragonborn didn't want them to kill each other, and she knew, the Dragonborn was quite smart, she knew that they were going to use her to join their side, so she used them to protect her and somewhat train her. And this is Sigund. She's the secret daughter of Ulfric Stormcloak. Even at this time in the story, during the peace treaty, she does not know that her father is actually Ulfric Stormcloak. But at the war's end, she'll find out. To me, my character, that was always once my Dragonborn, before I went with the whole alternate story character and that sort of stuff. Centaurus Gavianus, born to a whore, raised in a whorehouse. His name wasn't actually Centaurus. It was Malleus, or some other name. I don't even know. Gavianus, and he took his mother's name because it was his mum. So he was raised there until he was the age of 5, and his mother fell pregnant again. Now, in a whorehouse, no doubt they would take toxins that would stop, if they had morning sickness, they'd take this toxin, make them sick for a couple of days, and then get back to doing their job, earning some gold. But it's not always a guarantee. It's like a condom. It's not always guaranteed to work. And Centaurus was born. Now, he grew up in a whorehouse. It was kind of, normal to him walk down the hallway and hear women moaning and men moaning, and the door being slightly open and seeing a man smash a woman's back end, fucking her in the ass or whatever the hell. Like, that was just normal for him to see, or hear, if he wasn't outside playing with other, horse children. When he was 5, his mother fell pregnant again. And she took this potion to make it, to get rid of the baby. And it didn't necessarily work on the baby. Baby came through, but it knocked her around a bit. Now, she had this baby perfectly fine, but she was devastated afterwards. Like, she couldn't really walk, and she couldn't really stand up on her own for too long, and within a week she had died. Now, there was a wealthy imperial family that found out, they'd lost their own child at birth. They didn't want to return home to tell people that they had lost their child. It was a great dishonour, and it was heartbreaking. And they found out about this child, and they offered to buy it, because that child needed milk, and that mother needed a daughter. So they brought Centaurus' sister and raised her as their own. But they wouldn't take him because they couldn't explain him, and of course he was a child raised in a whorehouse. He was sold by the matron to the Legion, and he was raised from the age of 5 all the way to 17 before he moved to Skyrim, where he was just a foot soldier, before he was, fortunately, thrown into the service of Marilia Tullius on the way to take forth Ragstag from an organised group of bandits that were well and truly a match for the Imperial soldiers that were sent. Him and Marilia Tullius were the last ones standing. Him being the last survivor, being, he was a tactician, like a soldier she had never seen before. He had danced with them, he had prodded them, he had read their attacks, he countered their attacks, and she was quite impressed that and quite thankful that there was a soldier there that could protect her as she protected him. And he changed his name to Centaurus because he read a book while being raised in the Legion at the start of the Vanguard, which is actually part of my ESO lore, because my very first character in ESO was called Centaurus, and his backstory was that he was a thang, and that it was celebrating in the Imperial City after getting this guy they served to become emperor, and he's going to become a Dragonborn. They got seriously drunk, had a lot of mad sex, partying, all that sort of stuff before the sky cracked open, and all this crazy stuff. And I'd love to get into that story if you want, but to me that was the start of the Vanguard. You know, the elite bunch of Imperial soldiers that were frontline heroes. And he changed his name to Centaurus after the founder of the Vanguard that was 2,000 years ago. And he became Centaurus Gavianus. And just like Sigurd, he was sent to gain the allyship of the Dragonborn before realising that, you know, their war was nothing compared to the dragons. Over the space of months while training, he trained the Dragonborn to be more defensive. You know, defensive, you know, a good defense is a good offense, just like what Obi-Wan Kenobi would say. Where she was more of a savage attacker, you know. She was more savage with her attacks, and he was more defensive with his attacks. Both are very equal soldiers. Now, when it comes to the first trader, another character, you know, like I showed you Vitilia over there. Well, I actually made like a trader, like an Imperial trader character. This was the very first one I made, but he's nicknamed the Trader, but he's not an actual trader. Lavius Swordslinger is another half-breed of an Imperial mother and a Redguard father. His father was, well, he was a Redguard soldier that was, you know, he went to Skyrim to find aid for his troops against the Dominion. Now, while he was here, he was, well, badly wounded, just outside of Windhelm, and he was sent to the temple of, was a secret sort of temple that was secretly worshipped Talos at the time, and he fell in love with the priestess that helped heal him. And well, they didn't like the laws and the rules applied to them, so they kind of left outside of Windhelm, went to Dawnstar and started to farm and raised a family. And he, you know, he completely just ignored that he had a war going on because he'd fallen in love with a woman. And he'd raised 2 children. His firstborn was a male, and his secondborn was a girl. Labius was 17. He went out hunting with his sister to train her how to hunt. When he came back, he saw smoke on the horizon, and when he was in range of seeing, he saw Imperial soldiers throwing his parents' corpses onto the fire that burnt down home. Why? Well, because his parents were pretty much selling produce to raiders, or you know, the Stormcloak militia, before they were an actual army. And his mother was an actual Talos worshipper. So, you know, it got found out that she was a Talos worshipper, and they killed her and him for being traitors to the Empire. And he saw what happened. He had taken his sister back to Windhelm. He had joined up to the Stormcloaks, and at the moment she's training there right now. And he is, of course, a very fierce soldier, nicknamed the Traitor, even though he's never stood a foot in Cyrodiil. This is another character I really liked creating, and yeah, having an Imperial. This is my first ever Imperial that I'd ever made for the Stormcloaks. This is another character crafted and inspired by armor, Zakir. He's a Lunar Guard, which could be a unique sort of Templars in elsewhere that protect moon temples. But when he heard the call of the Dragonborn, even from elsewhere, and the word started to get around, he decided that maybe that was more worthy than being a guard or being a glorified bodyguard for a moon priest. And he left to go join the Dragonborn and save the world. And it's a very cool armor. I love this armor. Just like the Viridian armor. Completely characters inspired by armors. Uthgard the Unbroken, I made her look older, so she's got old skin, as you can see, scarred up, and this is all basically, I gave her her own sort of unique iron armor with Skyforge weapons, because she was once a companion, before she was kicked out for killing a whelp. This is an immersive follower that I made that I left inside of a tomb. I basically set her AI up to ignore combat and sleep inside of a tomb under storeroom. And she was locked away in storeroom, but probably because the Nords at the time were scared of her warrior prowess, that she might take command or might take lead, and they locked her away or they put her to sleep in a tomb. Who knows? It was that long ago that she wouldn't remember. But while in Solstheim, Ragni combined some of this, and she found a sleeping vampire, and she awoke, and she offered to join because she had no idea where the hell she was or who she was. Memories slowly come back to her, and yeah, I just really wanted to create a vampire that were like a sort of barbarian vampire, had like blind eye and like storeroom Nordic armor. I really like the way it looks. It looks quite sick. Hilda right here. Hilda is the woman you meet on the mountain when you're going up to. Why does her neck look funky like that? She's a Nord that you meet pilgrim. She's a Nord pilgrim that you meet going up the 4,000 steps or whatever it's called. That's her. The one that tells you. Well, she doesn't tell you who she is. She's wearing a Talos amulet normally. I decided it'd be more immersive to have her as a follower. That she'd realise that this is the Dragonborn and, follow her and see where it leads her. And she's an adventurer type, and she's also an older woman, so you can see to age over a body. Next one, a snow elf. You know, she was only a child when her people led the attack on the Nords, and she was still only a child when they got slaughtered by the Nords. See, elves, they live for a very long time. The ancient elves, at least, before they bred with humans or before they went extinct. Embora is a snow elf. And, well, they can live for 5,000 years. Compared to the normal elves of today, like Altma, who live for 400. She was only a child. She didn't have any say or any consequence of what she did. But her people were still put to the torch. Ysgramor wanted revenge. He wanted to put their race to extinction for what they had done to him. Destroy their culture, destroy their architecture, wipe out their race. Her father and her brothers, well, they went to the Dwemer, but her mother and her didn't. They hid. Eventually her mother died, but she found herself inside that tower where you find the Elder Scroll, and she stayed there for a very long time, because there was easy access to be safe inside of the Dwemer fortress. It was now abandoned by the Dwemer, and there was no Thelma there to try and kill her. There was only a ghost guarding the Elder Scroll, but she never went close to it, because if she did, it drew its weapon on her. So she pretty much stayed for 5,000 years, just meeting people, and very few people over time knew exactly what she was, and those people protected her for what she was. And eventually, you know, the Dragonborn was sent there to retrieve an Elder Scroll, and they found out who she was, and it gave her a choice to breathe life back into Skyrim as a Thelma. And she accepted. She was also a battle mage for the Dragonborn, and at this time, the last known Snow Elf. Lyris Titanborn, of course, inspired by the Elder Scrolls Online character, Lyris Titanborn, because I saw this hairstyle, man, and I was like, holy shit, that's Lyris' hairstyle. So I created her. I should have turned them all around, eh? I had a bit of light. Let's just, I'll do. And yeah, so Lyris Titanborn, very similar backstory. She got a name from the book she read. She was an orphan. She was too big and she killed her mother coming out. Her father dropped her off at the orphanage. She was raised in an orphanage. She was also taught to read by the current, by one of the assistants. Grandmother Kyle was still running the place, so she was kind of bullied for how tall she was and made fun of. Now, Lyris, growing up, she read a story of the ancient Nord heroes of the three great wars, and one of them was Lyris Titanborn. She changed her name because she didn't really have a name. She was just called, Giant or whatever, made fun of by the children and of course Galad the Kind. And she took the name Lyris Titanborn because she read the story of an ancient Nord hero that was unusually tall. And she saw pictures or drawings of this hero that was over 2,000 years old, and she inspired her entire look on her. And as soon as she was old enough to leave the orphanage, she left and she joined the companions. That's where she spent her time. She is also a lesbian, and she ended up doing the romance quest for the Carlotta, the merchant's always getting harassed by men, and she is her girlfriend, and her default AI is basically working the companions for hours, go out exploring for a weekend or a couple of days, and then sleep at Carlotta's house as her partner. Selma, this is another vanilla character who you find outside of a dwarven fortress, a Nordic ruin, with her Argonian servant. Argonian servant tries to kill at the very end, and eventually, I didn't want to waste her as a useless character, so I decided to make her a follower. She would follow the Dragonborn for saving her life against her traitorous servant that tried to kill her, and she would join the Dragonborn's adventures because she's wealthy. She didn't leave home to earn gold and fortune. She left home to find adventure, and the best adventure she could ever find was serving the Dragonborn, travelling Skyrim and saving the world. Another vanilla character that I made useful that was useless was Umara. She too is inside of an old Dwemer ruin, and when you meet her in the vanilla game, you've got to kill her and the Imperial that try to kill each other and try to kill you. But this time I decided to not make her hostile. I decided to make her, because in this story, the Imperial soldier's trying to kill her, and she's like, what are you doing, what are you doing? And out of the combat situation, she's actually the innocent one. Now, I made her unhostile, and we killed the Imperial dude, and so she's thankful for the saving her life, and she ends up joining the Dragonborn to fulfill the quest that she was sent there to do, and of course she joins under the Dragonborn for saving her life, and she travels and gets paid for that too. So this is Umara, no longer a useless NPC you just kill. And it's a good way to keep a shield, as you can see. Oh, Turiel, or whatever the hell that elf's name is. I keep calling her Tonariel, but her name's Tonariel or something like that. this is my Thieves Guild character. I don't think she's got the proper weight on at the moment. She looks a bit too skinny. Yeah, this is my Thieves Guild character. She was old Mary before she was left for dead by her own squad, and she basically became a hunter when she was able to walk again. She'd steal from other hunters, and she'd do all sorts of cringy shit and all that sort of stuff. Eventually, before she found herself in Skyrim, and she found herself being locked up in Riften, and eventually before she met what's his name? I forgot his name. He's got a unique voice. Before she joined the Thieves Guild, and so she went in there as a lone thief and she saw an organisation that needed help, that she could rebuild if she put her mind to it and absolutely make it super powerful. And she did that. She would turn the Thieves Guild from some rat shithole into a Skyrim powerhouse of information and theft and whatever. She rebuilt it from the ground up. She turned it back into something that was marvellous. Let's see if I'm right and her weight is too skinny, because it doesn't look like she has her preset enabled right now. Oh, yep, so she definitely... Oh, you're right, stop it. Anyway, she's probably going to keep doing that. So this is, my Thieves Guild character. This one right beside her is her. This is her. But this is her as the Dragonborn's follower. Now, like I said, she went into the Thieves Guild, she succeeded in doing what she did, and she rebuilt it from the ground up, making it a super powerful organisation. She's the boss. But of course, when she saw Thalmor walking into a bar and asking questions about an old man and this and that, she was quite curious. And then when she saw the Dragonborn walk in, asking the exact same questions, she was even more curious. She was in the background overhearing all of it with her very big pointy ears. And she saw more Thalmor coming in to ambush her. So she went back to her home, retrieved her Nightingale gear, and she ambushed the ambushers, saving the Dragonborn's life from Thalmor ambushes. And she killed the rat that was basically sent there to find her. And she offered to join. But she didn't offer to join out of the greatness of her heart. She offered to join because it's very bad business having dragons returning, which she's seen return, and burn down the world. Because she's not going to earn any gold, and the position that she's just put herself in as a powerhouse, her organisation will be burnt down to the ground if she lets dragons stay alive. So, she's remained as the Nightingale, as this entire thing. The mysterious character the Dragonborn doesn't know. Nobody knows who she is underneath that mask. Even if the mask comes off, she doesn't look like she does. Her skin colour and her hair colour has changed. A bit like the grey fox, the grey cow fox? The grey cow, that's what it's called, I think. Whatever. The grey fox, the cow of Eternal. These are armours also from the same Daedric prince. So, her look completely changes. Her eyes change, her skin colour changes, her hair changes. Even if it takes a mask off to take a drink, they're not going to know exactly who she is. Very much like the grey cow, or what is called the cow in Oblivion. The grey fox's face mask. Because it's got magic imbued into it to where no one's going to recognise who she is. So there you go. That's the follower version of my Thieves Guild character, and that's my Thieves Guild character right there. When the quest is all done and forgotten, I might retire her and return Tonriel back to the bar. This is another character created from an armor. He's very similar to the character that killed Freya's parents. If I can turn around please. Oh my god, I've been here for ages. He's a mercenary that hunts supernatural, but he willingly turned himself into a vampire. He's actually a bisexual, because, in the safe house I pull all these characters, he was screwing dudes with the mod Sex Life, and I was like, man, you fucking son of a bitch. But whatever, I made him bisexual because he's a bit more fruity of life. And Imperials I see as Romans, and Romans didn't give a fuck who you slept with. They cared more about your status. So he's wearing silver armor as a vampire, and he's got this really cool silver blade, which is actually called Vampire Blade from Lazy Open Packs 2. And he willingly made himself a vampire to protect himself, and it's a very smart, greedy plan. He hunts werewolves and he hunts vampires for gold. For their ingredients, for their blood, for their ash, for their eyes, for their furs, for their claws, for all the sorts of stuff. And for the bounties on them. And the only way he saw himself coming out of this alive was by making himself a vampire. wasn't just that he stood a better chance smelling and hearing them before anyone naturally could as a mortal, but because he wants to do it for 150 years. And then when he's 150 years old, he'll retire and return himself back to mortal. And then he can spend the rest of his days of the gold he had earned living a very luscious life. He'd still be in his 20s. He'd still be 27 years old when he, cures himself and be able to live the rest of his life in luxury with women, men, gold, manners, all sorts of crap. Because if he were to stay mortal, he'd have to do this for 50 years to earn a good amount of gold. He'd have to stay alive. And the injuries that he would sustain would be too brutal for him to really enjoy his life. So he thought if he's going to do this, he's going to make himself a vampire. And he gets to save gold for a lot longer. He gets to hunt beasts and stand a chance against surviving them and seeing or smelling them before anyone naturally could. It's just a big money-making plan. Turn yourself into what you're hunting, do it for a very long time, and then after 150 years, before you turn super ugly, turn back to immortal, and spend the gold you've made for 150 years for the remainder of your mortal life. Now Sim, the Silver Knight. He's not really a knight, he just looks like a knight, that's what he's called, and he hunts werewolves and vampires for their ingredients and for their bounties. And he's, he'll learn a lot of gold in 150 years if he stays alive, but his chances of staying alive is 10 times improved over being immortal. I just wanted to create some steel armor. There's no real backstory between her. She's a travelling adventurer, mercenary, and heard the call of the Dragonborn, and she joined up, and that's why I created this really cool armor. This guy is my Dark Brotherhood character. He's a guild character. Now, he's an evil son of a bitch. He'll kill you for the right amount of gold. He'll kill children, women, whatever. He's over 2,000 years old. He's an ESO character. Or ESO timeline. He's a Tharn. Aurelius Tharn. He was a great, he was like the fucking third nephew or this or that of some lowborn, or not lowborn, but lower part of the Tharn family. Whatever. And since that part of the Tharn family wasn't all truly known amongst the citizens or the nobility of Tamriel, they dabbled in assassination and sneakery and stuff like that. They were sort of the secret service of the Empire, where Adnathan's family was the mage and his younger brother was the military branch, which was Centaurus' Tharn's father, which was inspired by his name. Now he had joined on the Merlek Ball Menomarco scene and kind of became a vampire and killed those who deemed necessary before eventually that fell apart and he fled. This is the armour that the worm cult would use 2,000 years ago, but it's not commonly known what it was back then, or is now, so it's now very unique and his name is Blackwood. Well, he's had many names over the years, and of course no one's allowed to know what the worm cult wore, so it's now become his standalone armour. And for 2,000 years he's awoken, he's killed a lot of people, gained a lot of attention, and then hibernated for another 150 years so the ancestors would have died out that wanted revenge, wanted to find him. And he'd reawaken again, and this and that. And during the Oblivion Crisis, his caretaker was actually killed. And he didn't awake for the Oblivion Crisis, which was his time to wake up. But eventually, an adventurer busted into the tomb where he was, unhinged his door, and was fed on by him, woke him up and he fed on him, and he came to Skyrim during the time of the Civil War. Now, in my next playthrough, I'm going to do it during the peace time, which is happening right now. But I did this during the Civil War. But I think the perfect story element in the next time I play this playthrough would be to do it during peacetime, when the Empire and the Stormcloaks have to get along. It would be the perfect time to play an assassin's character, to have the Emperor actually come to Skyrim during peacetime, because the Stormcloaks can't afford to kill the Emperor or any Imperials, because if they do, they're going to lose the Dragonborn support, which could be defining as their number one person that could save the war for them. But yeah, that's my bad boy Aurelius Tharn, or nicknamed the Contractor. Over the 2,000 years he's killed people. And I'll show you his face, but his real identity is under the mask. Now, Tova Doomson. This is the grandmother of Sigund and Brianna. Her daughter became, a housecarl Ulfric Stormcloak, had his children, and died. Now, she looks like a harmless old woman from a distance. And that's the kind of way I wanted her to be. I started the game, the start of the story is her, man. Like, my my very first quest was attacking Thalmor in their fort, the very far western side of Skyrim. So I started the story. I played that story and Marilia's story back to back on the very same day. And again, she goes from looking like this to this. An absolute badass warrior. And yeah, I wanted to look like a sort of an older woman that would be really considered a scary threat. For those that don't really remember or know her, since she was once a very famous, dangerous warrior. Yeah, and she's kind of the commander of the Bearclaw Brigade. She gives orders to the girls to go, and that's where they go. She's the real mastermind behind it. And this is Toba. This is the first, and she's an elderly character. She's very old, you know, she's like in her probably 70s, and she's an absolute kick-ass warrior. Now, another vanilla character that I kind of made and gave her a backstory. You know, Angie. Angie, the woman that sits up in Angie's shack on top of the Gerald Mountains, that talks about Imperial soldiers killed a family in Helgen. Well, I've given her a reason to end up hiding up on top of a mountain. A backstory played in the game to the reason why one day maybe Centaurus would meet her on top of the mountain. Just as Agni, wearing hide clothes, wearing ordinary clothes. Why is she up on the mountain? Maybe it's not because she killed Imperial soldiers. Maybe it's because she was an absolutely vicious and very dangerous marksman for the Stormcloaks. That she was that great that she was known by her enemies as Angie Arrow Seeker. That she could fire an arrow from behind you, or from behind her, and it would seem to find its way into your heart or head. She was, you know, she becomes quite known for what she can do as an archer. And of course, well, this is kind of why she's hiding on the mountain. Because she's, you know, considered a war criminal at the end of the war. Or, if you're in a Stormcloak, maybe she just wanted to retire there. After the war was done and Skyrim was free, she just wanted to live on her own. After all the horrible shit she'd seen. But, in my case, she'd be up on that mountain because she was a very dangerous and prolific killer for the Stormcloak Rebellion. And is now marked as a war criminal since they have not found her body or retrieved her as a prisoner. And yeah, this is kind of backstory to why she's up on the mountain after the war's done. And I gave her clothing and armor meshed up and that sort of stuff to kind of give her more of a unique feeling. Alright. That's all my characters, man. Like, that took a very long time. That really did. Actually, it's not all my characters. I'm very sorry. We got one more left. I guess Skyrim's main character, the Dragonborn, the one that Skyrim's literally made for. This is Ragni. Now, very much like Octavia, the girl that went from a farm girl to a warrior, this is kind of what Ragni is very similar to. She has kind of a tragic backstory to where she had two other siblings, mother and a father. Her father was an Imperial soldier that fought in the Great War, and he was very disappointed by the Empire's surrender, but he didn't go as far as rebelling and joining the Stormcloaks. He'd seen so much death he just wanted to go back and marry the love of his life and start a family. And that's what he did. He got land from the Empire, since, you know, those that were loyal to the Empire were rewarded by gold or land. And he took land, and he built a farm, and he had 3 children. You know, and an ordinary life, a life that he wanted. He didn't want war, he didn't want this, he didn't want that. He just wanted a family. And after 10 years, that was taken from him. While he was out hunting and clearing out the marsh of undead and zombies and all that sort of stuff, vampires attacked his home and took 2 of his children and killed them, and killed his wife on the spot and left the body there to rot. Of course, Ragni got away. She had fled and run, and she was the sole survivor out of those children. Now, after that, his life had changed for the worse. He settled one more child, and he had to make sure that she was ready for when the day that he would go, that she'd be able to protect herself. And he taught her what he was taught by the Legion. How to walk around armor, how to fight the sword, how to get in the stance, how to defend herself. Of course, it was bare minimal Legion training, not enough to really survive out on her own in Skyrim. Eventually, you know, 9 years later, he had died. The undead had wandered into his front yard without him paying attention to it, and they had bitten him and scratched him and clawed him and, you know, really put him into a bad state where he was bleeding. And overnight, after that attack, he had died on Ragni. And Ragni stayed behind for some time, for about 6 or so months, running the farm, but she couldn't stay there for much longer after that, because it was it was a place full of so many ghosts of happy memories. And she left, traveled the world, and she actually joined onto a mercenary team after a while being on her own. And she fell in love with the guy that recruited her, and he made her a woman, and they did mercenary jobs, hunting bandits, clearing out, retrieving stolen items, retrieving artifacts, this and that, and they did that for at least 5 to 6 months. Then the dragons returned, and when they were returning back to their fortification, cracked Tusk Keep, they were attacked by a dragon, where her entire crew was killed, but they had done enough damage to wound it, where she was able to face it down and kill it, which the first time ever, she absorbed its soul, and her eyes had changed from the colour green to orange. What's she looking away for? And then the ground shook all across Temrel, and the greybeards streamed Dovahkiin, and that's how this journey really starts with Ragni's story. A lot of things inspired her story. Avatar, for example. I watched Avatar Last Airbender and Legends of Korra. Avatars, if you're familiar with that sort of setting, they all bend elements, but the majority of everyone in the world can only bend one element, or no elements. They can never bend more than 2. Avatar can bend all 4 elements: fire, earth, water, and wind. So they go from, they're known as a demigod, like a fully fledged avatar is someone you would not fuck with. You wouldn't send an army towards them, because they'd be decimated. But again, the Dragonborn is sort of the exact same thing. That's a fully fledged Dragonborn, like a fully fledged avatar. When Ragni starts her journey, she's got one shout that she learned on her own. That was where she actually had met Rosella and Freya when they were just them two, and she had done the mercenary contract with them up to get the Golden Claw. And that's where she had learnt Fuss. And she only knew one word before she had joined onto the mercenary team. She wasn't capable of fighting off 5 to 6 bandits on her own. She'd probably kill 2 or 3 before they'd outnumbered and killed her. She was nothing. And the whole idea of having all these playable characters from different stories and different arcs and factions was to train her and protect her before eventually she becomes something that could take on dragons on her own. She's not quite there yet, but she's standing a shit ton of a better chance than she was when she started. I mean, killing dragons has become a lot easier. I mean, if I had like 30 followers, the dragons would kill 5 before we killed it. Now they're flat out killing 1 or 2. Because I've got shouts so I can just disable it, just rip it to the ground, tear it a new arsehole. And all these characters here have been someone to train her, to teach her, and she's learned during the Civil War that these 2 enemies right here, side by side of her, have become friends. And potentially down the track more. Because they've stopped seeing their war, and they've started seeing them their brothers and sisters. That they are there to protect and train her, and save the world, together. And so, this massive story consists of many different characters that really bring out Skyrim's novel, sort of like a novelization of Skyrim, which each and every one of them have their own story, have their own story arc, and more so than others, but they fulfill that story by becoming part of the Dragonborn story. Centaurus and Sigarn would have never met unless it was on the battlefield without being for the Dragonborn. These guild characters had their own arcs, their own stories before they eventually found the Dragonborn. A thief joins under the Dragonborn. The Harbinger of the Companions. The Archmage of the College of Winterhold. Of course the assassin one doesn't. A pureborn werewolf, and another pureborn werewolf, and a 200-something-year-old vampire. These characters have their own vast, grand, beautiful stories, but they're then amplified by the Dragonborn story, which brings them all together. And this is kind of what I really want to do with my multi-character playthrough. I want to turn Skyrim from just some run-of-the-mill game where you play as one character that does it all and is a Mary Sue, to something where I can split the story up into different characters and make a bigger and grander story, like a novel or a TV series. And these are the guys that make it. So for those that have stuck around for this long, because holy fuck man, this feels like I've been talking for an hour. Probably has been an hour. I didn't think it would take this long, to be honest with you, but it did. For those that have stuck around, cheers. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you have, because man, I don't think I'd stick around this long unless I was doing something in the background, playing a game or something. But yeah, all these guys make my Skyrim story a much grander thing, to where it feels like I'm playing a TV series or physically playing a book. And yeah, a game without characters isn't really a game. It's shit. But I'm able to make my Skyrim from this slack campaign to an absolutely magnificent story. I've probably got more characters in the background, but I haven't really talked about. But again, I've talked for long enough. And if you guys got questions or you like these sort of videos, let me know, because if you guys like it, I'm going to like sharing it. If I don't get any comments or this or that, it just shows me that no one really gives a shit, and there's no point in wasting my time or your time. So, yeah, let me know who's your favourite character, by the way, because there's a lot there. Even if it's not a main story character, it's just some side character like the trader, or one of the vanilla characters that I expanded. Let me know. It'd be interesting to see what your favourite character is out of all of them. Mine, of course, is Centaurus, because he's the character that I made for me. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed. I'm out of here. Look after yourselves. And of course, Merry fucking Christmas.